At least 5 people have been killed and dozens injured after Russia launched 2 waves of missile attacks on Ukraine. The attack damaged critical infrastructure and a residential building, injuring at least 27 people. The missile attack struck Kyiv and other cities in an attempt to cut off power for residents. The attacks are a result of Russia stepping up its military campaign in the east of Ukraine. Joining me live is Ambassador of Ukraine to Australia, Vasyl Myroshnychenko. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Vasyl. Now, President Zelensky has called for more weapons from the West in the wake of these missile attacks. Do you agree this is needed?
Absolutely. As you can see, Russians have launched another big missile attack at different cities in Ukraine yesterday. And we've seen the huge destruction done to a residential building in Dnipro. Many people have died. I think the number of casualties is going over 20, and many are still missing, and people are trying to discover them from the rubble. We see that our North American and European partners are stepping up military assistance. Britain has committed to send tanks. Germany and France are also sending light tanks. Canada has just procured NASAMS, which is a $500 million air defense equipment, which they are procuring from the U.S. to supply to Ukraine. So we see how our friends and allies are increasing their support for Ukraine. And that's the only way, the best way probably to support Ukraine now to stop the war, because we need those stockpiles which are out there in the warehouses just being there. We need it supplied to our front lines, because the only way and the only thing that Putin understands is actually when he sees strengths, and it has to be military strengths, which he has to feel.
And Vasyl, we've heard that President Vladimir Putin has made some pretty drastic changes to his leadership, sacking the general charged with running the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, there was a reshuffle in the leadership, and there are different speculations what could be the reason for that. One of the reasons could be that Russians have been losing on the ground. Since the outbreak of the war, Ukrainians have been able to liberate 50% of the land which Russians have occupied. So they have been clearly losing in the ground in Ukraine big time. But there could be some other reasons why he's done it. What we see, they continue mounting massive attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure just by destroying it with missiles, and by actually, and these are war crimes according to international law that they are committing. And of course, they're making life of the civilians unbearable. And I think it would be highly desirable if Australia could increase its support for Ukraine.
And Vasyl, we hear how stoic and resilient the Ukrainians are, getting very close to a year since this conflict started. We're hearing recently, as we've just mentioned, the missiles, emergency blackouts in and around many of the cities in Ukraine. How are people feeling?
I was in Ukraine just 3 weeks ago. It's difficult. You see blackouts. Some cities don't have supply of water or heating. It's difficult. However, people are ready to bear the brunt of this, and they feel united as never before. And I think Russia has lost Ukraine forever, because whatever the pro-Russian sentiment that could have ever existed in Ukraine is now gone. For the past 9 months, is gone completely, because pretty much everybody in Ukraine has somebody who they know who got killed by the Russians. And this is what keeps people united and mobilized together.
And we just heard only a few hours ago that UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has promised to provide more tanks and artillery systems, as we've been mentioning, the Western areas. And you mentioned Australia as well. What do you think Australia needs to provide?
Look, there are many things which Australia could provide. Bushmasters have been performing really well. We would need more of those Bushmasters. A lot of them got already destroyed in Ukraine. They performed well by saving Ukrainian lives and helping us drive Russians out of Ukraine. Also, M113s. If sending tanks to Ukraine would also be highly desirable, and we'll be very thankful for that. As we see, we already have our European friends sending those tanks, because we need infantry fighting vehicles to expel Russians completely from Ukraine. And look, I think it's in the interest of Australians and Australian nation that will win this war for many different reasons. Firstly, we can stop hunger in Africa and Middle East. where countries depend on the supply of food from Ukraine, which is currently restricted, also will be able to get the prices for electricity and for energy back to normal. And this is what many consumers in Australia will benefit from. And of course, there are other issues which are related to the Australian values, fundamental values such as democracy, freedom of press, freedom of speech. This is what we are out there defending in Europe at this time. And of course, we don't want to set a precedent where one country led by an authoritarian leader is changing borders by force. So the sooner we're going to win the war, the sooner we're going to get back to normal. And I think it would be very good if Australia could step up its support. In the past, back in April, they have procured some anti-tank missiles for us. And I think they can always procure something from those countries who are ready to supply to Ukraine, or they could actually send more equipment, more ammunition, or drones. There are kind of big list out there, which is necessary, but it's important that Australia, which has been very supportive from the very beginning, continues that support, given all the hardships and challenges that Ukrainian people have to go through. And you've seen the footage. I mean, it's horrendous. It's obscene for what's happening and how much suffering Russians are bringing to Ukraine.
Thank you so much for your time today, Ambassador of Ukraine to Australia, Vasyl Myroshnychenko.
Thanks a lot for having me, Jenny.